We're taking Ella to Tulane next weekend.
You know?
Okay, here we go. Shh. Guys, shalom. Good Shabbos. I have a cold and my voice is going, so I can't. I'm going to need you to help sing. All right? Here. Here we go. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat et HaShabbat ledorotam berit olam Veshamru Yisrael et HaShabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם אותי לעולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת ושמרו בני ישראל את לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת How you doing? שבת ויהי נפל ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא ורע גויפם Amen. L'chaim. Okay. Blessing for study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay, so Torah portion is, yeah? Oh, so I didn't make enough sheets. I didn't expect this many people. If you're sitting by someone, you could stand. Maybe you can share. If you can't stand who's next to you, I understand that. Just keep it. But maybe if there's any couples. Also, you can also look online. It's also online. So if you have a phone or a computer, you can get the sources there. Sorry, I will start making more. I just hate wasting paper and didn't expect.
Need one? I'll share with Bill, the odd couple.
I guess we're good.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Okay. So thank you all for coming. Welcome back to those of you who've been traveling the world. So this is, the Torah portion is called Vet Hanan. And this is the famous Torah portion where we have the repetition of the Ten Commandments, but also the Shema and the Ve'ahavta. Now, I'm going to ask a very simple question that I don't think any of you know the answer to, but you will in about 50 minutes. I hope. So, in this week's Torah portion, we're commanded to say the Shema. Okay, it's going to sound simple, but it's not so simple. Why do we have to say the Shema every day? Simple question. Why do we have to say the Shema every day?
Because my mother said so.
Okay, so that's actually a better answer than what I was expecting. So it's a little more complicated than it sounds. Now, obviously, I know what you're all thinking. I've indicated that what you're thinking is wrong, and it's not necessarily wrong, because you're probably thinking it's the way that we affirm God's oneness and that we believe in one God. And that is true. I mean, that really, in a nutshell, is the Shema. But it becomes a command in this week's Torah portion because Moses says to the people, here's something you have to do. And that is the Shema. And then what we call the 3 paragraphs, which in the 2 and 3 in Reform liturgy are generally not done. I'm not quite sure why. Too much God, I think. But the first paragraph we do all the time, and that's the Ve'ahavta. Okay, and that's more love, and I guess, today's Tu B'Av. Today's like Jewish Valentine's Day, so you should be nice to your spouse today. There was actually a very funny Israeli skit on one of the TV shows on Tu B'Av, which is like Jewish Israeli Valentine's Day. And in Israel, you're either observant or you're non-observant. So you either go to the beach on Shabbos or you go to shul on Shabbos. And you either observe or you don't observe. And so this couple walks into a restaurant and they sit down. And across from them, there's another couple and they're fighting with each other. And the one couple, they can't take it anymore. They're like, guys, come on, it's Tu B'Av. And they say, oh, we don't observe. Okay, some of you got it. Okay, so the first time that we see the Shema is here in Ve'et Chanan, but the first time that anyone actually says the words Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, are not here. They're somewhere else, according to the Talmud. According to the Talmud, that is somewhere else. And if you don't believe that, then fine. But then you've been doing it wrong your whole life. Because Moses just tells the people in Ve'et Chanan to say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. But then we all know to say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. But Moses doesn't say to say that. So if you don't believe that the Talmud is where the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto part comes from, why do you say that? And the answer is because you've never known or cared. But you've come to the right class today. All right, so here's the irony of this. The irony is that we've always done it with the Baruch Shem Kavod. Right? I mean, who's ever done Shema and then said, Baruch Shem Kavod, who needs it? I'm going to take this time and sit and get ready for Ve'ahavta. Baruch Shem Kavod, We do it, right? Now, Torah doesn't say to do it. Only the Talmud says to do it. But I'm one of those people who don't believe in the Talmud, even though everything I do is from the Talmud. Right? The blessing you say over when you put the mezuzah up, it's not in the Torah, it's in the Talmud. Right? The Kiddush that we just did, it's not in the Torah, it's in the Talmud. Everything we do, how to do it, it's in the Talmud. Oh yeah, but I don't believe in the Talmud. I just do everything that says, but I don't believe in it. I only believe in the Torah, even though I don't understand the Torah.
Covering your bases.
Right, okay. So my question is, where does all of this Shema stuff come from? Why did it become such a big deal? And why did the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto add up? So the first time that it's said, it's not recorded in the Torah that it's said. It's recorded in the Talmud that it's said. But it's that famous section of the Talmud where the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto comes from. So what I'm saying is, if we want to understand why we have Shema and Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, we can't just read the section of Shema in Ve'et Chanan, in this week's Torah portion. We have to go back to that famous section from the Talmud in Genesis. Now, where is that scene? That scene is on the deathbed of Jacob. And when Jacob comes and calls his sons in to see him before he dies, that's the scene where it happens. Okay? And what I want to do now is compare that scene to the scene in Ve'et Chanan, our Torah portion this week, where Moses teaches us about the Shema. Okay? All right, so if you look with me on the sheet, you don't need to go back. I gave you the whole verse. You don't even need to go back in the... All right, Norman, would you mind beginning the verse? This is just a verse. It's not a commentary. Chapter 47, verse 31. This is what it says in Genesis.
And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
Okay, so what was Jacob asking his sons? What was he speaking to Joseph here, asking him to swear to him for? What do you want Joseph to do as his last wish? Yeah, bury him in Israel. Don't leave me here. Okay. And Joseph swore to him. Then Israel bowed his head at the bed. Now, why Israel is Jacob. Now, when we say Shema Yisrael, when the sons were saying, "Hear, O Israel," they were saying, "Hear, O Dad." But when we say it, who are we talking to? The whole people. But at that moment, for the sons, Jacob represented the father of the people. Who were the people? Them. Their descendants would be the people. Okay, so, which is perhaps for this very moment, the reason that his name had to be changed. Because in that moment, Jacob had to be Israel. But okay, so look what Rashi says on that verse. Norman?
Upon the bed's head, he turned towards the divine presence, the Shekhinah. They, the rabbis, inferred from this that the Shekhinah is above the pillow of a sick person.
Okay, so there is an idea that at the end of your life, when you're very sick, that God's presence comes to you. And when you're in God's presence, you have to bow. And so the reason that Jacob bowed at this moment was because he sensed that God was with him at the end of his life. Now, does that mean that God's with every sick person? I have a cold. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel that great. It doesn't matter. Let's not go that deep into it. Ibn Ezra, one more comment just on that verse, and then we'll go to the Talmud.
Israel bowed down. He paid homage to Joseph because he held royal position. However, I believe it means he bowed to God in praise.
Right, so Joseph comes in as second in command. That's someone that everybody would bow down to. But Ibn Ezra says, don't think that Jacob was bowing down just because Joseph was second in command of Egypt. He sensed that he was dying and that God was there, and that's the real reason that he was bowing down. So you might think that, Ibn Ezra doesn't want you to be confused. Okay. Now, this is a bit of a long Talmud section. It's very famous. If you look in any Orthodox prayer book, not any, but an art scroll or one that has a good commentary, and you go to the page of the Shema, and it has a commentary, and it wants you to understand the Shema, it'll tell you to go to this section in the Talmud. Bavli Psachim, the tractate having to do with Pesach, page 56a. And this is a very famous section, but this will tell the story of what really happened when the brothers came to the scene. Okay, here we go. Ken, would you mind reading? The sages taught in the Tosefta. As much as you can handle.
On 1 foot.
All right. All right.
The sages taught in the Tosefta.
Okay, so what's blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever? Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. So you've heard of it. Okay, but that's what that means. So there's a question of why is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed connected with the Shema? We all know that it is, but why? What is it? And the reason I ask the question why is because in Ve'et Chanan, which we'll see, in this week's Torah portion, when we're commanded to say the Shema, there is no Baruch Shem Kavod. So where does it come from? All right, everyone understand the question? Okay. Ken.
And if you do it without a pause, I learned last night that that's called an enjambment.
Yeah, in Hebrew it's called a hefsek. Right. Okay.
The Gemara asks, what is the reason that we recite that passage, blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever, even though it does not appear in the Torah? The Gemara answers, we recite it in accordance with that which Rabbi Shimon ben interpreted homiletically. As Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, that it is written, Jacob called his sons and said, gather round and I will tell you what will occur to you in the days. Jacob wanted to reveal to his sons the divine days. Divine presence rendering to the prophecy. He said, perhaps the divine presence has abandoned me because heaven forbid one of my descendants is unfit, as was the case with my grandfather Abraham, from Ishmael emerged, and father Isaac, from Esau emerged.
Okay, so chapter 49 of Genesis, verse 1 says that right before Jacob died, he was about to tell his sons what was going to happen at the end of days, meaning when is the Messiah going to come? And there are lots of different reasons that the rabbis talk about as to why he didn't finish. The Gemara here, the Talmud here is saying, well, no, the reason is because either the prophecy left him. And he thought maybe, and he didn't know the answer anymore because the prophecy cut off. You know how like Wi-Fi goes out? That's what happened. It just like wouldn't load. So he thought maybe it's because one of my kids is destined to be a problem and they're not fit to hear it. And why did he think that was possible? Because it happened to Abraham, because he had Ishmael. And it happened to Isaac, because he had Esau. And how do I know it won't happen to one of mine? So that's just what he thought. Okay, that's where we are so far.
His sons said to him, Hear Israel, our father, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. They said, just as there is only one God in your heart, so too there is only one in our hearts. At that moment, Jacob, our father...
Okay, so, sorry. At that moment, when it looked like he was going to die, his sons said, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. They said, you think that maybe one of us is going to not make it, like Esau and Ishmael, because they worshipped idols. But Shema Yisrael, listen, Dad, we're all with you in this thing called monotheism. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So where does the Shema come from? The Shema comes from the representatives of every single tribe of the Jewish people affirming to the father of the Jewish people, Jacob, right? We're B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, Israel's Jacob, that we're going to stick with monotheism. That's what Shema is. And we've been saying Shema every generation since to affirm we're still the people of one God. So why was the Shema said for the very first time? Because all of Jacob's children were affirming to him on his deathbed that they weren't going to worship idols and they were going to remain worshiping one God. That's where Shema comes from, according to the Talmud. Clear so far? Okay. Now, Jacob's going to respond to that. And his response is going to be, Baruch Shem. Okay. But why? So we know why the Shema was said for the first time, but now we need the Baruch Shem Kavod part. At least according to this famous Talmud. Okay, clear so far? Okay. Ken, you need oxygen? You want to pass off? Yeah. All right.
At that moment, Jacob, our father, said in praise, Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever, as all his children were righteous.
Okay, so at that moment, and this is the part you'd underline, right? That's the very first time that anyone ever said, Blessed be God's glorious kingdom forever and ever, because that was Jacob's indication before he died that his ancestors would continue Judaism forever. That's at that moment he finally believed when he saw that all 12 of Abraham couldn't even get his 2 sons to be Jewish. Isaac couldn't even get his 2 sons to be Jewish. Jacob got all 12. And at that moment, at least for that moment before he died, he said, wow, we're good. This is going to continue. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, forever. Okay, that's where that comes. So when we say Shema Yisrael, we're affirming that our nation believes, that our people of Israel believe in one God. We always have and we always will. And then Baruch Shem Kavod is the affirmation that the truth of who God is, will be in the world forever by this nation called Israel. That's the point of the Shema and the Baruch Shem Kavod. But now we know where it started so far. Okay, let's keep going.
The rabbi said, what should we do? Shall we recite this verse? But Moses, our teacher, did not say in Torah.
Okay, so now we have a problem. Now you know the answer to the question. The answer is yes, we do say Baruch Shem Kavod. How do you know that we do that? Because we do that. And even though you may not stay for services today, you've been to them in the past, and you know that we do it. All right. All right. So, but you see, the rabbis had a question. They said, okay, you told us this story, good story. They said Shema, then they said Baruch Shem Kavod. But we have a problem. Because we read Ve'et Chanan, we read this week's Torah portion, and when Moses told us to say the Shema, he doesn't say the Baruch Shem Kavod, so what do? Now, we know that ultimately they did put the Baruch Shem Kavod, but we don't know why. Because we have this problem that, why didn't Moses tell us? Moses knew this story. Why didn't Moses tell us to also say Baruch Shem Kavod in this week's Torah portion? He goes from Shema right into Ve'ahavta and skips the Baruch Shem Kavod. Okay, so do you see the question of the rabbis? Okay, we're making progress. Here we go.
So then shall we not recite it? But Jacob said it. In order to resolve this dilemma, they established that this passage is recited surreptitiously.
Right, which is probably not a good translation, but here's how you really do it. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem. You know why we whisper it? Because we're not sure if we're supposed to be saying it or not. That's where the whisper comes from. That's why you whisper, because there's a debate. Are you supposed to do it, or are you not supposed to do it? So the rabbis in the Talmud said, we'll kind of do it. We'll kind of do it. That's where it comes from. All right. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak, here we go.
Rabbi Yitzchak said that the school of Rabbi Ami said, this is analogous to the daughter of the king who smelled the fragrance of the dried spices stuck to the bottom of the pot, afraid to eat them. What can she do? If she tells the servants to give it to her, she will be disgraced, as the dried spices are a contemptible food. However, if she does not say that she wants to eat them, she will endure the suffering. Her servants began to bring them to her surreptitiously. One should conduct himself in that manner in similar cases of uncertainty.
Okay. So don't worry about the story at the end so much. But it is true. To this day, we say the Baruch Shem Kavod in a hush. In fact, some people do it almost totally silently. Right? Yeah.
Isn't there one time when we say it aloud?
Once a year. Yom Kippur. Okay, we didn't get there yet. But we will. Okay, so let's now go to our Torah portion, Ve'et Chanan, and see where we learn about the Shema, which I actually forget what chapter 6, verse 4? Sounds right. Okay. It's not a very long Torah portion, Ve'et Chanan. Okay, so let's start with chapter 6, verse 1, and we'll get to it. Joe, anyone have the page in stone, in plow?
Hello.
1366. Here we go. Chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, verse 1.
Here,
Yeah, let's just get the whole context.
and this is the instruction, the laws, and the rules that Lord your God has commanded me to impart to you to be observed in the land that you're about to cross into and occupy. Occupiers even then, sadly. So that you, your children, and your children's children may revere the Lord your God and follow as long as you live.
By the way, the English is occupy, but the Hebrew is lerishta, which means inherit. It's the land that you've been given by God to inherit, which is nicer. But that's the actual translation of the word. Rishta, occupy, is lichbosh, which is a totally different word in Hebrew. So, but
All his laws.
Plout was, Plout was. No, I don't. Plout was a Labor Party. So, BB never. Okay, it doesn't matter.
All his laws and commandments that I enjoin upon you, to the end that you may long endure. Obey, O Israel, willingly and faithfully, that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of our fathers, spoke to you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might.
Okay, sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the connection here between love of God and land of Israel? Do you remember, I had the other day, now that we're getting back to this time of year, the kids who I'm starting to meet with to prepare their Torah portions and write their speeches have their bar mitzvahs, right after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And so we're reading Genesis. So I was reading Lech Lecha with, I forget if it was a bar or bat mitzvah student, one of the students the other day. And the first line of Lech Lecha, which is chapter 12 of Genesis, God says it's the first thing that God says to Abraham. He wasn't even Abraham yet, he was Abram. And he said to him, Lech Lecha, get up and go from where you are to a land that I will show you, from your father's home to Israel. He doesn't say to Israel, but it becomes to Israel. A few verses later, we find him in the West Bank. So we know in Shechem. So we know that he meant Israel. So that there are 10 tests that Abraham's given, and the 10th test is to the Akedah, to sacrifice Isaac. And if he passes all those tests, he'll qualify to be the first Jew. The first test is go to Israel. So if he would have said, I don't want to live in Israel, right then, that alone would have disqualified him from being Jewish. He could have done the other 9. He could have killed his son. Could have done everything, the circumcision. But if he would have said, I'm not moving to Israel, he wouldn't have even had the chance to do the other. That was the first one. The most important one was you have to be in Israel. And the whole Torah, the point of being in the Torah is it's a journey to get to Israel with the Torah. And so there's no other religion like this, where the land is the basis for the religion. There's nothing else like it. You can't really be Jewish without the land of Israel. Now, we're in the diaspora right now. We had this portion a few weeks ago where we saw Maimonides said, okay, so we're in the diaspora. We're waiting for God to bring us back. If you want to go back, you're welcome to. But we're not at that stage in history yet. But we see here that loving the Lord your God comes right after. If you don't follow the mitzvahs, you're going to lose the land flowing with milk and honey, which, by the way, we did. That's why we're here. There's an amazing. Well, I don't want to get into it. That's a different thing. All right, so let's just make clear, though, that verse 4 is the Shema, verse 5 is the Ve'ahavta, and there's no verse 4b that says Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Vayed, right? You see with your own eyes, it's not there. But if you look in any prayer book, real prayer book, you'll see the Shema and then Baruch Shem Kavod. And so the rabbis say, yeah, why do we do that? Because that was Jacob's response to his sons. But are we really supposed to do that? Well, if we were, why didn't Moses tell us that in the first place? So that's the question we don't have the answer to yet. Why didn't Moses say here, either at the end of verse 4 or the beginning of verse 5, Baruch Shem Kavod? Okay, so now on the back of the sheet, yeah. Can you use a microphone so they can hear you at home? Here you go.
If I remember correctly, when Jacob says Shema Yisrael, it's the angels that come down and say Baruch Shem Kavod. And the only reason that we say it aloud on Yom Kippur is because that's the only time that we, the people, the human beings, are as pure as the angels.
How do you know that? How do you know that? You went to yeshiva? Okay. All right. So most of what you remember is correct, but let's fine tune it a little bit. What you remember comes from the sources that I brought. So let's take a look. But yes, you're mostly right. Sifrei Devarim is midrash on the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, and there's a very interesting story here that we need. Shelley, do you have a mic? Bill? Okay, would you mind reading the midrash on the top of the back page?
And thus do we find that before Jacob's passing from the world, he called his sons and rebuked them individually, and then called all of them as one and said to them, can it be that there is some reservation in your hearts about him who spoke and brought the world into being? They answered, hear, O Israel, Jacob, just as there is no reservation in your heart, so there is none in ours. But, Devarim 6:4, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, at which he said, blessed is the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. And this is the intent of Breshit 47:31. And Israel bowed at the head of the bed. Is this to be taken literally? Obviously not. The intent is he expressed thanks and praise to the Lord. That base matter had not issued from him, thus his bed. Others say Reuben repented. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Jacob, this is what you desired all of your days, that your sons awake and retire with the recitation of the Shema. This is the intent of Devarim 6:4. Hear, O Israel, Jacob, variantly, hear, O Israel. From there it was ruled that if one recited the Shema but did not make it audible to his ear, he did not fulfill his obligation.
Right, so you actually, when you say the Shema, you have to hear it in your ear. You can't say it so, because sometimes we daven on our own. Like if you don't have a minyan, you're not supposed to daven out loud. But when you're supposed to pray loud enough that even if you're whispering, that your own ear can hear it. Now, if you're deaf, you're, what's the word? What is it? Exempt. Yeah, such a hard word. If you're exempt. But if you can hear, then you have to hear it. Okay, now, a few things just happened here. One of the things we have to answer is, if in the Torah it says that Jacob paid homage and bowed at his bed. But when we do, actually, let's just look one more section of Talmud, and then I'll explain this midrash as well. So, Bill, would you mind reading where it says Psachim 66a?
It starts with and the priests.
Yeah.
And the priests and the people standing in the temple courtyard, when they would hear the explicit name emerging from the mouth of the high priest, when the high priest did not use one of the substitute names for God, they would kneel and prostrate themselves and fall on their faces and say, blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever.
Okay, so there's some interesting things going on here. And it's sort of just by the way, but it's what happened. So when the priests in the Holy Temple used to say the Shema, they actually pronounced we say Adonai. We don't say the four letters, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. We're not allowed to say that, but they used to in the first temple, not the second temple, but in the first temple. Why? Because they were in the presence of God. They saw the fire coming down from the heavens. And when you're the priest in the Holy Temple and you see the fire coming down from the heaven and you say the Shema, you're allowed to say God's name. But when you do that, you have to bow. So they bowed. But today, when we say the Shema, we don't say God's name. We just say Adonai, right? Shema, Yisrael, Adon. Okay. We don't pronounce God's name ever, actually. Why not? Well, because we don't see the fire, we're not the priests, and we're not in the Holy Temple. So why then, when the Shema was said, did Jacob bow? Because Jacob didn't see the fire, wasn't a priest, wasn't in the Holy Temple, but yet, when it was said, he bowed. But he bowed even though he would not have been permitted to say the four-letter name, which we call the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. And the reason is, and this is totally just by the way, but it happens to be confusing because we have to ask the question, when we do Aleinu Baruch Hu, we bow, but Shema, we don't bow. You would think, why did Jacob bow when he said the Shema? And the reason is, because he was dying, he was in God's presence. Had he not been dying and he was feeling fine, he wouldn't have bowed. But because he just happened to be dying, he knew that God's presence was there, just like it was in the Holy Temple when the fire was coming down. And so by the way, he bowed. But don't let that fool you and think that when you say Shema, you should bow, because the only reason they were saying Shema is because they were in the presence of God when they were doing it, actually with God. The Shekhinah was with them, and we can't be sure we have that at normal prayers, and so you don't do it. That's what the Gemara is saying here. Yeah. Which is not necessarily germane to our conversation. It's just like an interesting thing to point out. But
So when do we bow at other times, like Amidah and...
You bow at other times because there are moments in prayer, not many, but a couple, where you are greeting the king. And it was tradition in the times that God is the king, but it was tradition in the time that the prayers were written that when you came into the presence of the king, you bowed. And so that they said, if we're going to bow to a human king, how much more so when we come to greet the king at the Baruch Hu and at the Aleinu, that we should bow. So, okay. And that's just more like of a custom. Okay, so here, this is like the one slight difference. Jacob actually did say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto. When Moses says Shema, it was only the angels that said Baruch Shem Kavod, and the rest of the people didn't do it because they weren't angels and they didn't really have the holiness to do it. However, the one time that we can say Baruch Shem Kavod out loud, that we all do have the holiness to do it as the Jewish people, is when we're all acting and performing like angels, which is on Yom Kippur. And that's the reason that on Yom Kippur is the only day that we're supposed to say the Baruch Shem Kavod out loud. But that was Moses and the angels. Not Jacob actually did say it. But Jacob at that moment was in the presence of God and I guess felt that he had the right to do it. Okay, now, so now we know what Baruch Shem Kavod is. But there's another aspect of Shema that we haven't gotten into that is extremely important. Because when we say Shema Yisrael, we're basically taking our cue from this is what the brothers who represented all of the Jewish people said to the father of the Jewish people, Jacob. Okay, fine, Shema Yisrael. First thing they say is, listen, Dad. And then they say, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But at that point, they have a choice on which name of God to use. Okay? And to bring in, if you look at verse 4, in chapter 6, verse 4, Moses tells us what name they used, right? Shema Yisrael. And then you have there the four-letter, what we call the tetragrammaton, the Yud He Vav He. Now, the Yud He Vav He, it can mean a variety of different things. If you're interested in the documentary hypothesis, this is what the J source is. Because I don't even like to say the name, but you know those people, the blank witnesses? Those guys, starts with a J. In Hebrew, it starts with a Y, which would be this name. Look, I grew up in a Chabad day school. You said this name, you get hit with a hanger. So, or thrown into a wall or something, which the way that the rabbis used to throw us around was pretty unbelievable, but I can't say we didn't deserve it. I can't, so it's sort of a wash. It's sort of not me so much, but some of the other guys. Not the most well-behaved. Okay, so what this name often means in the Bible, or in the Torah, is that this is God's name when the Torah is talking about God's attribute of mercy, and the Elokim name, the E source, is usually the name that talks about God's attribute of judgment. However, the way that we say, listen close, so it's Yud He Vav He. Now, if I want to say the word, do you remember when Moses said to God, when I go to Egypt and I tell them you sent me, who should I say sent me? What name does God give Moses? Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I will be that which I will be. Right? Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So you notice that four-letter name sounds a lot like Ehyeh. Now, I want to tell you three words in Hebrew, because the Yud He and the Vav He are like a composite of three Hebrew words. Haya, which means was. Hoveh, which means present or is. And Yihyeh, which means will be. And what the four-letter name of God really represents is eternality. I'm the God of eternity. I'm infinite. I have no beginning and no end, right? That's what that four-letter name really means. It's a composite of was, is, will be. For God, there's no time. God doesn't exist in time. Time's for us to try to understand. And God's infinite nature is beyond our capacity to understand. How could he have always been? Like what do you mean he was never born or started? He just never, it's beyond us. But that's okay. That's God. So when you're saying that God will always be, and then the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Le'olam Va'ed means forever. That this will continue always into the future. Then what you can say is, and this is very difficult for us, especially in a post-Holocaust world, and especially, with everything that's going on today. But keep in mind, when the rabbis wrote this, they were living in a time as cataclysmic as the Holocaust. Right? They were living in a time when the Second Temple was just destroyed, millions of Jews were slaughtered, and the rest of them were exiled into slavery, and it was, for them, the Holocaust. Okay? I mean, it was a smaller scale than the Holocaust because there weren't as many Jews, but it was cataclysmic for them. And this is when they're writing this stuff. And they say, even as times are horrible, this goes on. There's no threat that Judaism will be wiped out. That's not a thing. We'll always be here. And that gave them solace. So there's a moment in Jewish history, about 130 years after zero, meaning about 60 years after the Holy Temple was destroyed, when a group of rabbis were in an attic on Passover. and they were discussing the Seder. And they were discussing it and discussing it and discussing it all through the night. And finally it got to the morning time, and they're still discussing it. And the question is, what were they really discussing? And what they were discussing was that the Seder was about redemption. But here they are, 60 years after the temple's been destroyed, they're slaves. They're not free, they're slaves to the Romans. It's illegal to be Jewish. That's why they're hiding in an attic. And by the way, all those rabbis who were in that attic would ultimately be tortured and killed by the Romans. One of them was Rabbi Akiva. But then the morning comes, and their students knock on the door, and the students say, you guys are still talking about this. Higia zman kriyas shema. 4 famous words. The time has come to recite the Shema. Right? Anyone know this story? It's in the Haggadah. We read it every year in the Haggadah. Okay, so take a look. The third source on the back page. Who's got a mic? Anyone over there? Hillary? Where it says, it happened.
It happened that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining at a Seder in Bnei Brak. They were retelling the story of the Exodus from Egypt the entire night until their students came and told them, our masters, the time has come for reciting the morning Shema.
Okay, and what they were saying was, the time has come to revolt. The time has come to fight back for what it means to be Jewish. Now, unfortunately, they convinced the rabbis to revolt. The rabbis did revolt. Rabbi Akiva thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. They revolted and they failed. And the Romans crushed them terribly. So it's not the greatest ending, and maybe for that case, not the best story. But the point of the story is that the student, and this is why it's in the Haggadah every year. Remember, the Haggadah was written while the Jews were slaves. And we read the Haggadah now, and Passover is so wonderful. But imagine if you were reading the Haggadah any time from 70 CE to 1947 CE. It was still maybe hopeful that maybe someday we'll be redeemed. Maybe someday we'll get the land of Israel back, but who knows, right? But from 70 CE to 1947 CE, when Jews were reading the Haggadah, hope in the world still existed that someday Jewish people go back to the land of Israel. And what is the Haggadah telling us is the code word for hope that the Jews will always be here? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So, what I'm telling you is this. Every time that you pray and you get to the Shema, there's something that you're supposed to be thinking about. And it's not just that there's one God. It's that there's one God who's connected to the Jewish people, and that connection never ends. And so, there was this whole type of philosophy that came into the world after the Holocaust called After Auschwitz. And there were Holocaust survivors and other thinkers who wrote about the death of God. It's really interesting stuff and very hard to understand, some of them. But I think even after the Holocaust, the answer is that the Jews didn't go for that. We're still here. Right? There are more people studying Torah today than have ever been in the history of the world. And we still go to shuls and we still so forth. Okay, and so the idea of the Shema, even after the Holocaust, the idea of the Shema won out. That the Jewish people will be connected to this one God forever and ever, so what I'm telling you is if you're not thinking that during the Shema, you're doing it wrong. Right? Now, there's 2 parts to it. The first part, the Shema Yisrael, is your pledge that you'll be part of that. Shema Yisrael, listen, Jacob, or whoever the father of the Jewish people is, I'm still in. I'm still with you. I'm not Esau. I'm not Ishmael. I'm still in it. That's Shema. Fine. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Because saying Shema Yisrael, I'm still in it, is hoveh, is present tense. So then what did Jacob say? Wow, you've showed me that this is forever. So go to the next page. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. This is forever. Okay, now, Rabbi Akiva believed that. How do we know that? So I just want to show you one. There's a tractate in the Talmud called Makot. It's one of the shortest tractates, and this is the very ending of that tractate, where it says in the prophecy. This is often read in different liturgies. It's included in certain liturgies. It's a very reassuring comment because, I mean, imagine if you're Rabbi Akiva and you see in your day the destruction of the Holy Temple. I actually saw like an AI video recently on the internet, like trying to play out what happened. And you see a group of Jews standing on a hill watching the temple burning. And imagine, I mean, the complete and total shock. By the way, the way we imagine that is by images of the Holocaust. I mean, that's what we saw in our time. But that's what they were looking at. But even as Rabbi Akiva was looking at that image, look what he said. So here's the end of Makot. Sherry, would you mind reading? In the prophecy of Uriah.
In the prophecy of Uriah it is written, therefore, for your sake Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become rubble, and the Temple Mount as the high places of the forest, Micah 3:12, where foxes are found. There is rabbinic tradition that this was prophesied by Uriah. In the prophecy of Zechariah it is written, there shall yet be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem. Until the prophecy of Uriah with regard to the destruction of the city was fulfilled, I was afraid that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled, as the two prophecies are linked. Now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah remains valid. The Gemara adds, the sages said to him, employing this formulation, Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us.
Okay, so in other words, there was one prophecy that the temple was going to be destroyed. But Zechariah had a prophecy that the temple was going to be rebuilt. So Rabbi Akiva, looking at the destruction of the first temple, and Zechariah's prophecy that the temple was going to be rebuilt meant that the Messianic era would come, that the third temple would come, and that would be it. So Akiva's looking at the second temple burning, and he says, okay, we knew this. Uriah, there was a prophecy. But if it came true, it must mean Zechariah's is going to come true. And someday, the third temple is going to be rebuilt, and we're going to go back to, we'll be back. And the rest of these people who must have been thoroughly and completely distraught at seeing the second temple being burned said, Rabbi Akiva, you've given us some comfort. Okay, so I think the message of Rabbi Akiva is that even in the most horrible times, God doesn't leave us, and that redemption will come. And that's what helps us get through the difficult times. And that's his message, fine. But it's also the message that has most sustained the Jewish people over our history. And how do I know that? Because if you ask any Jew what's the most important prayer, they tell you it's the Shema. Now, until today, you may not have known why. I mean, sometimes people say, what's the most important prayer? Someone says, it's the Shema, and I say, I like Hashkivenu. It's a better tune, better guitar song, get less complaints, right? Nobody, it's the Shema. It worked. It's the most important prayer. It's the prayer when I go into people's hospital rooms and say the Shema, it's the one that's most moving. If I went in there and sang Hashkivenu, they'd be like, ugh, I hate this tune. Where's the nurse? Yeah. But if you sing the Shema, the tears come. Because for whatever reason, the one thing that has sustained us is that we're the people of the Tetragrammaton, the Yud He Vav He. We're the people who are with God, Haya, when it was, Hoveh, right now, and Yehiyeh, when it will be. So, look, we're in a terrible time right now. We're in a resurgence of anti-Semitism. If you thought that anti-Semitism was going to die because we started a group here at the temple to fight anti-Semitism and that anti-Semitism would disappear, okay, it didn't. Our work is very important, but it's a problem right now. But the words of Rabbi Akiva should give us hope. The war will end. The anti-Semitism will recede to, manageable levels. We Jews in America here are going to be just fine. And it doesn't really seem like that right now. But that's been our history for the last 2,000 years. The Jews in Germany in 1936, 37, 38 also said, I don't know that we're going to make it. But we always do. We always go on. We always will. And not only do we always do, we always have the connection with God. And by the way, that's what the Christians tried to teach us from the very beginning. That's what replacement theology was. You Jews no longer have a connection to God. It moved to us. And unless you join us, your connection with God is over. And the same thing with the Muslims. You Christians and you Jews, you no longer have a relationship with God unless you move to us. And our response was, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. What don't you understand? And the reason that Moses doesn't say Baruch Shem Kavod, to get to the final answer, why is there no chapter 6, 4b? Why does it go from Shema? Why does it go Shema right to Ve'ahavta? Why is there no 4b? It's because the Shema, in and of itself, with the four-letter name, already indicates what Jacob said, that this goes on forever, because that name already has a future tense to it. And so it's already included. So when Moses was giving the command, and he said, say the Shema, here's the Shema, say the Shema, he doesn't give the whole text. But it's already assumed that you need to do the Baruch Shem Kavod with it. Now, you don't do it out loud, because you're not necessarily in God's presence. But it was already assumed, when I tell you that this is the name of God that you use, of course you have to say, this is forever and ever. It's almost as if it's redundant. And so if you want to whisper it when you go forward, you can. But this should do two things. One, it should change the way you say Shema forever. And two, every time you do it, it should give you hope that no matter what our enemies think and no matter how much they line up against us, we're not going anywhere. We're always going to be here. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Nice to meet you. Enjoy your Shabbat.
There's two, the other problem we have in terms of international news, Israel is down by 8, and the other side is not. So we say what's happening. They say what the hell we want. So what happened is 2 Palestinians are stampeded and shot by Hamas, rushing for the booth. And Hamas shoots them. And then Hamas reports Israel killed 93 total fiction. It's complete total fiction. And the world's wrong. And Jews are buying it. Because what? But how can you not, why wouldn't you buy it? It's the Wall Street Journal, it's the New York Times, it's on CNN, it's on MSNBC, it's on CNN, it's on everywhere. Well, News mentioned because they have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, who are legitimate Nazis. Legitimate Nazis. But the rest of them are more pro-Israel. I hope so. I hope so. Oh my God. And Matt Gaetz? He's a Nazi. He's saying the same thing Marjorie Taylor Greene is, blaming everything on Israel. Epstein is the Mossad.